So, for this video, we're going to talk about what I think is one of the least used classes of skills in Diablo 4. And that is the ultimate skills. Now, ultimate skills, in theory, are supposed to be the capstone. They're supposed to be the crescendo to a build. They're supposed to be the strongest element of your build that you pull out in key boss scenarios and you pull out in situations where you need that edge to push you over. So they're all designed around longer cooldowns than most. However, one of the problems that you'll find is that most classes don't want to use an ultimate ability, if at all. Well, why is that? Well, let's start. Most people already know that your basic skills aren't something that you're going to be using all that often when you get into the end game. Basic skills' primary purpose is to generate resource or to be a spam option for classes that are primarily cooldown based instead. So if you look as a sorceress, for example, you don't use your basics to generate mana, so your basics are just there to farm until you either get enough mana or while you're waiting on cooldowns. For classes like Druid, Barbarian, Necromancer, they're using their basic skills to generate resource or to help generate resource. Now, the thing is, all basic skills, core skills, defensive skills, and class-specific skills can be upgraded multiple levels. And if you look, this Werebear Druid that I have, 9 out of 5 basic, 12 out of 5 core, right? My rat skill right here, 13 out of 5. That is a significant bonus to the individual skill that I am receiving. That is significant. Ultimates can't be scaled like that. Ultimates cannot have levels put into them. This ultimately does hurt the skill's viability because it means that the skill will always be scaled based around your primary weapon exclusively if it deals damage, if it doesn't just grant you a bonus. That is slightly problematic because it makes it difficult for you as an individual to build more damage out of that skill. In addition to this, with the length of the cooldown that most of these skills have, most of the time the shortest cooldown that's available to you is only 45 seconds. This means that you can go extended periods of time without having access to a skill. Most builds would rather run an extra defensive option, such as this build that runs Bulwark and Bloodhowl, or even an extra core skill if you want to run conflicting core skills. Specifically highlighting why each ultimate sucks, the other issue that you have comes down to ultimate choices. A great example of this, Grizzly Rage has 2 separate legendary aspects that are tied to it. One of them changes it from a dire werebear to a dire werewolf, thus giving the werewolf build options, right? So if you want to make a ultimate build, you can only run one of these, which already detracts as well. This is a mistake that they learned in D3, because in D3 I did something similar. I ran multiple ultimate skills in D3 on some builds. As an example, my Barbarian ran Avalanche, Berserker, and Call of the Ancients. I ran all 3 of those, plus a basic and a core, and I forget what the other skill that I ran was. But I knew I ran Frenzy, I ran Whirlwind. I don't remember what my 6th skill that I ran in D3 was. So they changed that where you can only run one ultimate skill. But that does hurt viability of some builds. So for example, a Storm Druid is going to want to run Cataclysm. But a Nature, an Earth-specific druid, they don't want to run Petrify. An Earth druid gets more value out of a basic skill, Landslide, Bulwark, Eat Cyclone Armor, maybe a Companion, Boulder. You get more value out of that than you would out of Petrify. Because it's 50 seconds cooldown for what is a stun and a slight crit bonus. And look at the effects. This effect right here is an extra stun. Is an extra second of stun. This is worthless. Killing an enemy gives you 25 spirit. If you were to scale this ability, where these effects became stronger by putting more points into it, that would be one thing. This skill would be more used. As it stands right now, there's no reason to run Petrify when you're better off putting those 3 points into literally any other skill. What would you rather have? An ability that's taking up room on your skill bar, 3 points of your skill, or would you rather have 3 points into Defiance, which is 12% increased damage to elites? Elites are more common, and the bonus damage is more helpful for killing them than, say, a stun. Cataclysm is okay in Storm builds, because Cataclysm does synergize with other Storm skills like Endless Tempest, which increases the duration of Hurricane and Cataclysm. You know, there are things in the Hurricane build that you want to do. Okay. So, Cataclysm is fine. And if you look, you can get vulnerable off of Cataclysm, you can get increased duration off of it. So scaling this is fine if you're running Cataclysm. Grizzly Rage is another one. If you have the ultimates for it, it's okay. Now, here's the problem. Petrify doesn't have ultimate, or doesn't have a legendary. Cataclysm doesn't have a legendary. Lacerate doesn't have a legendary. Lacerate's another one that a lot of werewolf builds don't want to run. Werewolf builds, pure werewolf builds, run the Grizzly Rage key legendary that turns you into a werewolf instead. Because this just isn't that great. It gives you immunity for a little while. It's a 45-second cooldown. It's the lowest of the cooldowns. The damage is pretty good, 460%, but remember that that's being divvied up between 10 hits. So 460%, that's really 46% per hit. 46% damage per hit. If it crits, it gives you a heal. The initial strike crits and deals bonus damage. Sure, that's nice, but now you're running a crit-based werewolf build. Most werewolf builds are building into poison and things of that nature. So just looking at the druid, 2 of druid's ultimates aren't used and aren't very good. Because A, they don't have legendaries. B, their own build doesn't want to run them. Versus having an extra skill that they can customize more. Now, if you go to ultimates, you're going to find yourself in a different situation on Necromancer. Alright? Necromancer has 3 ultimate abilities, 2 of which see use. Part of the reason why they see use is relatively interesting. At least in my opinion. Because, again, the ultimate skills that are available to you on Necromancer have value. But they don't have value in the way that you think. Alright? Now, one issue that Necromancer has is that if you are a Summon Mancer, you're gonna lose 1 to 2 of your skills. The easiest thing to cut out is ultimate skills. Now, you have 3 ultimate skills. Now, Army of the Dead has 1, but that only affects summons. You're only running that ultimate, that legendary, for the ultimate if you're a Summon Mancer. And Summon Mancers don't often run Army of the Dead. In addition to this, it's a very lackluster skill. The main benefit is that it raises warriors and mages, meaning if there's no corpses, you can summon your army off of it on a cooldown. But it's also a much longer cooldown than the other skills. That's 44, that's 52, that's 61. It's the longest of the cooldowns, and it also deals the least amount of damage. In addition to this, Blood Wave has a generic legendary where it hits multiple times, with each wave dealing less damage. That can take up a ring, a glove, an amulet, and be fine. The individual reason why you would want to run Blood Wave in particular is for the Blood Orbs, because Blood Orbs synergize very well. You can use the Blood Orbs to reduce, if you have the ring, like, if you look at how I'm built, alright, so I have the Blood Wave, each wave summons more Blood Orbs. And if you run the Fast Blood, which is great on a ring, where your Blood Orbs reduce your ultimate cooldown. Round that 1.5 up to 2, by the way. We'll call that 2 seconds, because that's what the game's treating it as just about. That means that every Blood Orb that you consume, whether that is being consumed by a Blood Lance, or whether that is being picked up by you, taking 2 seconds off. So you can essentially take this 44-second cooldown and cut it down to around 20 seconds reliably. That's pretty good synergy. Now that does mean that once again you are losing 2 legendary slots and 2 offensive legendary slots at that. Like, I have glove and ring. That means, okay, so I have to run, my other ring is offensive, amulet is offensive, and my weapons are offensive. That's kind of problematic just to get that to work. There is also the unique as well. I tried not to highlight uniques too much, but I do want to mention this, where it turns, oh wait, do I have it? I don't think I have it. I don't have it. I got rid of it, I think. Yeah, I got rid of it. Fuck. That sucks. There is the legendary two-handed scythe, where it gives you effects for Blood Wave and Bone Storm. Now, by far the most commonly used one is Bone Storm, and that's because Bone Storm has defensive utility. First off, it has a high lucky hit chance. It affects both you and your golem. It's damage per second. It's not great damage per second, but it is damage per second for close range enemies. It gives you damage reduction while active. It gives you increased crit while active. This means that bone builds, whether they're Bone Spirit or Bone Spear, want to crit a lot, want to run this. And because it gives you damage reduction, it means that shadow builds, which can benefit a little bit from damage reduction, shadow and darkness builds benefit from this. In addition to that, there's a lot of legendary aspects for it. You can get the barrier off of it. You can consume corpses to extend duration off of it. There's the new shield, the Lindless Wall unique, where if you have all your sacrifices gone, or you sacrificed all your minions, you can get multiple static Bone Storms up. So there's a lot of utility that Bone Storm has. You can use it for increased crit. This synergizes well with the Corpse Tendril legendary, where you can basically go Bone Storm, Corpse Tendril, Bone Spear has near guaranteed 100% crit chance. You can use it for the damage reduction. So if you synergize the damage reduction off of that, the damage reduction off of Reap, and the damage reduction off of the aspect of Might, you can have very good tank power for Uber Lilith. Now, if I'm saying that ultimate skills have a problem, why am I talking about these two? The common theme is how many of these skills are ran because of their legendary aspects. Blood Wave has 2 legendary aspects you have to run to make it viable. Bone Storm has a lot of synergies that you can run to make it viable. Army of Dead, which is the least used, only has 1 legendary aspect, and it's not ran often. because it only works in one build. You can't use it in a summon, in a solo Mancer build. You have to have minions for it to work. Therefore, Army of the Dead sees no play. Similar to how in Druid, the most used ultimate has multiple legendaries for it that are actively ran. Another example is Barbarian. This Barbarian that I'm going to log into and show you is specifically built around a legendary aspect for an ultimate skill. It's specific. That's the reason why I'm highlighting this Barbarian. I have one Barbarian that doesn't even use an ultimate skill, because of the 3 ultimate skills that are available, they're not very well synergized. So if you look, this is Lucky Hit Chance while Call of the Ancients is on your action bar. Damaging enemies with Leap, Upheaval, or Whirlwind has a chance to summon an Ancient to perform the same hit. Basically, the way this build is set up is that anytime I proc Lucky Hit off of Upheaval or Whirlwind, I'm guaranteed to have an Ancient perform the same. So as long as Upheaval and Whirlwind's Lucky Hit, and if you look, Upheaval has a 25% Lucky Hit, Whirlwind has a 20% per hit. Alright? As long as those trigger, I'm guaranteed for the Call of the Ancients to proc. What Call of the Ancients does, why I like Call of the Ancients personally, for 6 seconds, you get the bonus damage. The bonus damage is very good, but you have to look, for those 6 seconds, you get 10% increased damage, 20% bonus attack speed, and you get the bonus effects from the individual Ancients. Korlak's 10 Fury per hit is very good. Talik's Slow is okay, it's not great. And then Madoc's, or however the hell you pronounce that name, I'm sorry. Madawak. Yeah, let's go Madawak, fuck it. Madawak's Stun are pretty decent effects. You can get Fury Generation and Crowd Control effects off of them. They could also help burst down bars relatively quickly. The main reason why I like Call of the Ancients is because it is a good burst of damage that you get out of it. And there's some niche effects that you could have. I have one build that runs Call of the Ancients as an ultimate skill just because I didn't want to run the 3rd Shout. I didn't want challenging Shout because I'm not really building heavy into Thorns on that character. Call of the Ancients is one of the least used skills, though, ultimate skills on Barbarian, because Barbarian kind of doesn't run a lot of their own skills. Iron Maelstrom is one of the worst in the game. There's no legendary aspect for it. If there is, I don't have it. There's no real unique to it. Yes, it has a relatively short cooldown at about 45 seconds, but you have to activate it 3 times as well, so it's a little bit of a spammy ability. The individual damage isn't very good. Yes, you can get bonus crit damage and crit chance. Yes, you can reduce the cooldown anytime you swap weapons. These skills enable you to get more synergy off of Iron Maelstrom, and they're supposed to work with the Walking Arsenal passive. It's supposed to be what ties the Walking Arsenal build together. But most Walking Arsenal builds don't really run it because it's just not as damaging. And in addition to this, you need a way to reliably maintain the Walking Arsenal damage bonuses, which doesn't oftentimes leave you room. You need a basic, you need at least 1 core skill, if not 2. You need Rallying Cry, and then you need some type of other damage form, at a minimum. So normally, you're going to lose 4 spots, because you're going to have a basic, you're going to have a core, you're going to have Rallying Cry, and then you're going to have a niche weapon mastery to trigger damage on a cooldown. That's 4 out of your 6 skills. If one of those skills is Iron Maelstrom, you're not going to get reliable triggers on Walking Arsenal, which is what holds Iron Maelstrom back. Iron Maelstrom works better in high crit builds, which is normally around a two-handed sword. High crit builds don't want to run Iron Maelstrom because they're using the other weapons that you're not necessarily using. And Wrath of the Berserker's main value is it gives you Berserk and Unstoppable for 5 seconds. If you're not a Berserking build, you don't want to really run this for the Unstoppable because you get more reliable Unstoppable out of either Charge, which is a shorter cooldown, or Rallying Cry, which has a shorter cooldown and has more utility benefits. If you are a Berserking build, you're obviously running this. So Barbarian's issue is that there's just not a lot of reliable ways to trigger. And again, Wrath of the Berserker doesn't have legendaries tied to it. Berserking itself has legendaries tied to it, but if you're not running a Berserking Barb, you're not really running it. Then last up, you have the Sorceress, which the Sorceress has good ultimates, but unfortunately they fall into the realm of being class-specific or build-specific. Similarly to the Druid, in that Druid has to build specifically into that ultimate. If you're not, there's not a lot of general purpose in their builds like Necromancer is. Necromancer has a lot of legendary aspects because a lot of their ultimates are built. And a lot of sorceresses would just prefer to run the extra defensive skill instead, because when you look at their ultimates, they're heavily reliant on a build. If you look at Deep Freeze, what does Deep Freeze do? It makes you completely damage immune for 4 seconds. It gives you a barrier based off of each enemy that you froze. And then your non-ultimates your non-ultimate cooldowns get reset at the end. So you could slot it as a defensive skill, but if you're a fire sorceress, are you gonna run that for the barrier and the defensive reset? If you're a lightning sorceress, are you gonna run this for the barrier or the defensive reset? No. Ice sorceress will run it for the chill and the freeze automatically. Lightning sorceress is another one. What this does is that whenever you cast a shock skill, a random core conjuration or mastery, so that would be charge bolts, chain lightning, lightning spear, or ball lightning. One of those skills will also be cast. Okay? You can get bonus attack speed, and this one for crackling energy. Crackling energy builds will run this just for the bonus duration. And any chain lightning build, or ball lightning build, or charge bolt build will run it. But because this is tied strictly to lightning, unless you are specifically running charge bolts, chain lightning, or ball lightning as your core mastery skill, you would not run unstable currents. Non-lightning builds get no value out of this. You have to cast that skill specifically. It's not going to trigger off of the free chain lightning attunement. The only real generic option you could run would be Inferno, which isn't really that great. Basically, you get a big chunk of burning damage over 8 seconds, and then you can pull enemies in, and your Pyromancy skills cost no mana while it's active, which is the main reason why Pyromancy wants to run it. Pyromancy wants to run it because once you activate it for 8 seconds, you can just spam your other skills. So you can create near limitless meteors, near limitless firewalls, or near limitless fireballs, as long as Inferno is active. So that is a interesting thing in that Fire wants to run the skill, But because there's no real synergy between classes, a non-fire sorceress isn't really running Inferno. Because they would get better synergy, like Ice gets better synergy at Deep Freeze. Because the ultimates on Sorceress are so limited to their individual class, it holds it back in terms of experimentation and build power. So unfortunately, the main thing that you have to look at in order to improve each of these skills needs either some form of additional leveling, or they need some form of additional divergence. Another issue that you have with ultimate skills that I'll highlight as well is the lack of player choice involved with them. So if you look at Lightning Spear as an example, Lightning Spear has a branching path down here that allows you to customize it. You don't get that same level of customization with ultimate skills. If it functioned that way, to where ultimate skills could have a little bit more use, I could see these applications becoming more useful. And if you notice this lightning build right here, I don't even run this because I'm not built around crackling energy at all. So this is basically just a skill point that I'm saving myself to point into something else. All in all, I think the ultimate skills in the game need some work. They need a buff in order to make them stronger, to make them viable options, or they need to be things that are mandatory, where you have to mandatory equip an ultimate skill in order to access the key passive portion of the trait. That could be a restriction that you could put if you want people to run at least an ultimate skill. And I think that would make some builds viable. For example, if you're a lightning build and you really aren't built around unstable currents, you could maybe consider slotting Deep Freeze for just the immunity if you were forced to run it. If you're an ice sorceress that doesn't want to run Deep Freeze for whatever reason, like if you're an Ice Shard spam and you don't really care about chill and freeze, you just want to spam Ice Shards as much as possible, maybe you run Inferno just so that you can pull enemies into the center and group them up for bonus pierces. Something along those lines if you were forced to run an ultimate skill. Anyways, at least that's my thoughts on the matter.